into the great 40-year history of Grendel. First of all, congratulations on 40 years.
Thanks. I feel like I'm one of the last men standing from the 80s.
I mean, you started young.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. Grendel first came out in '82, which means I would have been 21. It was my first published work. Should I launch this over here?
Sure, please.
So, I was at that point trying to come up with, my own character, my own approach to a narrative, and I kind of had the idea to focus on the villain as opposed to the hero, which nowadays seems ubiquitous. Back in those days, it was pretty rare, pretty unique, and pretty unusual. Marvel and DC had attempted it a couple of times. DC even did a Joker solo book that only lasted 2 issues. Can you believe that today? So I decided I wanted to focus on the villain because, as I was at a stage in my life, like everybody, I grew up reading comics and loving heroic narratives. And then you reach a certain point in your life where you realize that these really are myths, because you look around you and you realize, oh, the good guy doesn't always win, and the bad guy often gets away with some horrendous shit. So I decided to try and do an anti-hero, a villain. And I was inspired by a book that I read when I was 13 that was named, believe it or not, Grendel. That was by an author named John Gardner, wherein he retold the original tale of Beowulf, but from the point of view of the monster, sympathetic to the monster. And that just kind of blew my mind.
Had you read Beowulf before that?
Not the entire. I knew the legend, but I didn't know. I had not read the entire epic poem. No, that's a slog, I will say. So that kind of blew my mind, and then I got exposed to the works of Michael Moorcock, and specifically Allred, where you had this main character that was kind of the antithesis of all the heroic stuff I'd grown up with. He was ostensibly the hero and the center character of it, but he was tortured, he was miserable, he was, he did horrible shit, killed almost everybody he ever loved. And so all this inspired me to take a kind of round the corner sort of approach to a heroic narrative. And so I came up with Grendel, and I decided to make my character dashing and handsome and attractive, and the quote-unquote hero brutal and savage and ugly. And again, at that time, that was a really radical approach.
And just to make sure, is everybody here very familiar with Grendel on a scale? Yes? Yeah? All right, I figured. So we won't belabor too much with the beginnings, but yeah. So as you can see here, we just have a few examples of some of the first iterations at Dark Horse, at least, of Grendel. Diana, you were the one to kind of bring Grendel into Dark Horse. Can you talk a little bit about why it was such a great fit for Dark Horse?
Well, I hope
Because you were there.
I was there. I'd been actually working with Matt since 1985, and Grendel was in need of a new home, and I think we're like decades later, but so we forget that back in the 90s, in 92, when Grendel came to Dark Horse, Dark Horse offered creator ownership, and that nowadays is maybe standard. There are many opportunities for that. In 92, not so much. Dark Horse was one of the independent companies, came around in 1986, and was really committed to this idea of creator friendliness and giving creators not only copyright ownership, but royalties, and again, all these things that in the industry we sort of take for granted nowadays that we could not back then. So in that sense, it was really important for Grendel to be in a home where Matt's rights would be respected.
The rights are great and the ownership is great. The most important thing to me was always the creative freedom. Literally, Dark Horse has never, ever, ever said to me, no, you can't do that. Ever.
But Matt and I have argued about that.
You're a different ball of wax. There's no such, there is a word like funner. We used to argue about the word funner. I would try and use funner all the time. She'd be like, no, it's more fun. I was like, yeah, but more fun isn't as fun as funner.
That sounds like an argument to have with you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for everyone, can we talk a little bit about, just what is it about Grendel that makes it such a rich ground for storytelling that has made it last for 40 years and going?
Well, it was the fact that when I was first approached by the original publisher to continue Grendel into a monthly, I had just wrapped up the first Grendel story arc, Devil by the Deed, in the back pages of Mage. Most of you already know this. And I thought, well, that's a great idea, but I've just killed the main character. And then I started thinking about, how would I approach doing a monthly? Because monthly comics didn't seem that interesting to me. They seemed repetitive. They seemed that there was never any consequence or real world repercussions. So here again, I drew inspiration from another pop culture source, from Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion, the fact that there are many different versions of the same character in different universes and different continuums. I kept mine all in the same continuum, but I also drew upon the comic strip character, the Phantom, the old comic strip character by Lee Falk, wherein the version of the character we see in the comic strip today is about the 23rd or 24th Phantom. It's a line of people who, the son takes over from the father and becomes the next Phantom. So I decided to have different people take up the mantle of Grendel and become a new Grendel. Mainly because I had just finished both Mage and Grendel and the first story arcs, and I was really feeling like I don't want to get trapped in this this globe. I want to be free to be able to do kind of anything I want, and I don't want people to know what to expect from me. So I decided to step back and try something I had never done before while we got this new version of Grendel, which was to work with other artists, to write for other artists. And that would force me to open my visual preconceptions, to see through other people's eyes, to see through people's other creative ways of approaching visual storytelling. And that's how I first teamed up with these two blokes. Yeah. And in fact, strangely enough, I was doing a countrywide tour. It's like getting a little too grandiose here. For Mage at that point, and I was here in Portland, and I was at a comic book shop, and I saw some of their art hanging on the wall, and I thought, damn, that looks good. And I got their contact number off the owner, and we hooked up eventually.
Yeah.
And
well, that's it was our humble beginnings in a lot of ways. We were already doing. We'd done comic books or comic strips, I guess, in our high school newspaper here in Portland. We grew up here, and we were kind of we were young, like pretty much fresh out of high school. And I'd actually worked at the comic store where Matt had done his signing.
What was the show?
It's called Future Dreams, which some of you guys might know. It's on Burnside.
Yeah.
18th on Burnside. And I was kind of a comic nerd. I had I was into Marvel. I was a Marvel kid, loved Iron Man and Spider-Man. So and Jakob was really into like Flash Gordon, and so we were already kind of drawing, living in our little creative worlds, and we collaborated a bit because we were kind of getting into like, okay, we've got to make a living. We were already kind of fresh out of high school, and so we were doing like rock posters and rock bands, rock stuff, and it was in that kind of MTV era. So, and I had just quit the comic store because he was paying me half cash, half credit. And I was like, I'm on to you. I was like running out of good stuff to buy. I was like, okay, I need clothes. Anyway, so priorities were shifting at 16. Anyway, so we were just like kind of on our own. We had this little studio downtown, and we were just, we were going by Pander Brothers, and I think we were like Forward Age Graphics or something like that. But we were in business as the Pander Brothers doing graphics, but I'd left some essentially like convention sketches, maybe a little more elaborate, because we were doing those superhero drawing, Wolverine, that kind of stuff, and
Wolverine and Badger, I remember particularly.
Badger, yeah, okay, I didn't remember drawing that, but so influenced by some of the early indies. Actually, I bought Grendel #2, probably with credits, so I still have I knew the character. But it was one of those things where it's like kind of we were growing out of comics, or just in that I was really just getting into fashion and music, and we were really getting into cinema and filmmaking, and Jakob wanted to be a filmmaker, I wanted to be a fashion illustrator, and we just had all those big dreams, and
all those factors came to play when they worked on Grendel. They brought every single aspect he just spoke about there to the page.
It just kind of plugged in, and it was one of those weird things where it was just I guess, kismet. I mean, you came into the store, saw the work, and kind of something clicked, and we were just so hungry.
Did I
We were
call
like,
you, or was it by actual snail
Just
mail in those
through
days?
So I recall going into the comic store to see if I'd sold anything, and off the wall, and they were like, "Hey, there's a comic creator who came through and did a signing." And
Oh, I left my number.
you left your
Yes.
information, and this was the Kimiko days. So this was probably '85. So your tour was in '85.
Yeah, 85. Yep.
And I was like, okay, cool, and we'll check it out. And so then that's probably we probably talked to Diana or you. I can't remember, so long ago now, but you know, and we did some sample pages, and that was sort of like, okay, it was like kind of getting on a horse again, because we hadn't drawn comics in a while. We've been doing kind of comic book style stuff for like advertisements for Kinko's and weird ad.
But we've done a lot of comic books just kind of ourselves, just like we had a whole series in our school newspaper that we were doing, and
we knew
so
the language.
We had definitely were, you know, passionate about comics and loved comics growing up, and even had drawn like an entire 2-issue 48-page or something like that. That's
well, basically
still needs to get
it
inked.
still needs, yeah, right. So I had this comic book character. I don't know if you remember, if maybe we showed you samples, but so we had this character named Carla,
It was this kind of sci-fi,
femme fatale, sort of, you know, what now sort of ubiquitous type of character, secret agent, and so we done some stuff with the school newspaper. I had, you know, we drew this whole thing, I lettered it, and it's never seen publication. It's like just, and it was very elaborate, and it really showed some of our early, I guess, you know, potential. And so we had kind of cut our teeth doing this book that's never seen publication, of this character named Carla. And that had, so a lot of Christine Spar sort of came out of having drawn this femme fatale, of learning to draw women, because I was doing a lot of the figure work, Jakob was doing a lot of the...
I was just going to ask, how were you guys divvying
just
it
to
up in
put
those
that
days?
Yeah.
But Jakob had, prior to that, Jakob was like doing these drawings that were like insane for like a 14-year-old, that were just like amazing, and I was just trying to catch up, because I'm like, you know, 2 years younger, and so I was trying to just...
And you guys were like 18 and 20 when we hired you, I think.
Yeah. So we were all,
Really-
Think about that.
And another interesting aspect of this is I had decided that rather than write what's known in the industry as full script, which is, it breaks it down, you have the page, you have all the number of panels, every panel is described, all the dialogue is already there, all the captions are already there, everything's already, boom, done. The writer does his thing and he just steps back. I had decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to work what at the time was called Marvel style, where the writer wrote a plot where you would just say what happened on any individual page. There was no breakdown of panels. There was no, you know, occasionally there'd be a bit of textural dialogue in there just to drive a point home. But my thought was, I want to truly collaborate with somebody, you know, and I felt like, look, I can draw. If I want to totally control things, I should draw it, you know? So this is my first time working like that, and I was yours too.
Yeah.
And it was just a very interesting way of working, because I would come up with this story and paste it out on the page, but then they would send it to me in a completely different, you know, it would show up.
We
It
go a
was
little
completely
rogue.
different, but it was a different. No, it wasn't different, but it was like, wow, that's not how I would have drawn it. That's not how I would imagine it. Great, you know, I wanted something new. This is something new that brings something cool to the table, you know.
Yeah, I would say that it's probably probably the most collaborative writer-artist projects that we've done, in the sense of that freedom that was there. And I think that actually, one, it was a great trust that you had in us, but it also definitely brought our full imagination to bear, because there were so little strictures, although what was in that text was the drama. You know, the scene starts in this mood and it ends in this mood, and that gave us this incredible ability to really, in a way, improv with the drawings as actors, and be those actors for those scenes. And then Matt would get those back, and, you know, like you say,
so then the pencils come back to me after them, and then I would write the dialogue and the captions. And then at the same time I'm writing that, then they move Jay was inking you at that point, and the inks were being done while I And then it all kind of comes together in this giant Frankenstein thing.
Yeah.
But it ultimately culminated in, I mean, what was interesting was seeing, like, I remember the first couple scripts were definitely you had a little bit more dialogue, more structure, and then you were it was always there, you were going, okay, I can kind of
Yeah,
let these guys
get used to
go,
things. And that culminated in number 9.
And then it culminated, essentially, but I kind of felt like what was happening, we were almost communicating through the process, and we weren't talking, there weren't a lot of conversations, maybe 1 or 2, and it was really happening through.
It's because long distance costs a lot of money.
Well, right, back then, we're cheap, and so that process was happening, that communication was happening through this kind of unspoken, if you will, way, creatively, but it is as though, and I could feel like we were bursting at the seams. We were kind of almost pushing it, like we were doing things that were, kind of going a little off the rails here and there in hindsight. And I remember there was basically one point where suddenly it was as though, I don't know if it was unconscious or conscious or what have you, but it was like, we're going to do an issue where it's just silent, and it really was almost like you let us completely off the chain.
Well, because
Sure.
I didn't, we're talking about issue number 9 there, which had
with
only 2
issue
panels,
number
first
9.
page and last page,
Yeah.
and didn't break anything down by pages. I just wrote the story. Here's what happens. You guys pace that out. And, break it down however you want, page by page, just make it fit between whatever they were, 24, 26 pages in those days.
And while we go, I want to point out that I'm highlighting, so these stories are now collected in this first omnibus edition, which is what they were just signing. And I put this up because
Oh, and in fact,
this is
everybody
how
can
many
sign this.
creators are in that collection. That whole list, that includes all the people at this table and then some. So, and you can see all these details on our website in greater detail, but.
With 40 years,
Yeah.
Matt is one of the great curators in the history of comics, and how generous he is, and the way he reaches out and taps into talent.
Tell them how I met you.
Oh man. Well, because of my older brother, comic books were always around. Then my parents split up. He went away, and they killed Gwen Stacy. I stopped buying comic books and spent all my money on record albums. So it was only rock and roll and music is all I cared about. But then a friend turned me back onto comics again, and gave me a bunch of stuff. And among that was Mage and Grendel, and Frank Miller's Daredevils, Mr. X, the Hernandez brothers. Anyway, so not only did I then obsessively finish all the collections of my childhood, but what was happening in the 80s was just mind-blowing. And with Matt having this double-edged sword with Mage and Grendel, it was just so inspiring. It's what I wanted to do. And one of the first things I ever submitted, I drew 6 pages of Grendel and I sent it to Diane. Where that's who ended up with it, and I got one of the nicest rejection letters I've ever received in my life. But I remember one of the things I wrote was, I drew these 6 pages in a day, and she wrote back, "Hey, that's really fast. Good for you." They're garbage. And Lauren colored them for me, and we did this Vault of Mike Allred retrospective thing, and that's the only place they've ever been seen. But I had been storyboarding a screenplay. I wanted to make a film, and my friend who turned me on to comics again as an adult said, "You should do comics. You can draw. I see, And so I started to do that, and then what was to be my first published effort was a book called Dead Air, published by Slave Labor Graphics, and the publisher was in San Jose, where Matt ended up moving.
For a year, I lived there for a year, yeah.
And saw this stuff and sent me a Mage postcard when I was a TV reporter in Europe. And so I get this, not only this cool postcard from one of my heroes, but it has his phone number on it. So I called him.
Yeah, from Germany.
and it was just really thrilling. But it's that kindness, that generosity, that nurturing of talent to find a little spark. Like he sees there's stuff on a wall in a comic shop, and they end up doing this incredible, groundbreaking, innovative rock and roll, Art Deco, and it's just like wow. And so that's what was happening in the independent world. That's what was exciting. And then so all of my favorite artists were coming from Matt. Bernie Moreau, Tim Sale, Patrick McKeon. It was like pa-pow, pa-pow, pa-pow. And so anytime it was a celebration anytime something came out, and you always knew that you were going to get something really cool. And
hopefully you would know what to expect.
Exactly. And so, and then we became great friends and hanging out. Everybody moves to Oregon for some
and I moved
reason.
to Oregon.
But we knew you before we moved here, Mike. I'm sure of that. And
No.
why-
Corresponding, only corresponding.
But, okay, yeah, but, yeah, why did it take us so long finally to get you?
I
in the-
begged. No, Matt would always be like, I'm thinking of something for you, and I got something for you, and we'll do something. We'll do
And by
something.
the time we got around to it, you had launched Madman. You were offering
Yeah.
your own
Yeah,
genre
which
of
was my Grendel, you know, it's my mage. It was that's how Matt inspired me. Make my own stuff, because of course before that you just want to get a gig at Marvel or DC, you know. But no, with what was happening in the '80s, you don't want to go anywhere near there. You wanted to do your own thing. You wanted to, like you said, where nobody's going to tell you you can't do that, and that's all over everything Matt does, these when you. I don't know how he does it, but finding talent like the Panders and Bernie Moreau, somebody who is one of the most hated illustrators style-wise, but also beloved. He's one of those, you either hate him or you love him.
Yeah.
And I love that kind of, because the people that are passionate about that kind of work are passionate about that kind of work. And it's very inspiring.
And everybody has Bernie's stuff from The Devil Inside. Of course, he followed up them, and he couldn't look more different than their stuff.
Their stuff was so gorgeous.
No, that's Mike.
There's Mike.
Yeah.
That's where I got to do some pinups, and then I finally got to do.
But I shared a
that
studio
shirt.
for a while with Bernie when I lived in Montreal, where my wife lived at the time, and Diana was running the Grendel.
His wife
Column.
is her sister.
Her sister, yes. An incestuous thing. She had gotten this fan letter that was a poll signed by a bunch of neighborhood kids. Like, some of it was in crayon and shit. And it said, "Dear Diana, Bernie's got to go." And then it was signed by 12 names. And he had that tacked up above his drawing board.
I think we printed that. I mean, but look, that was the great thing about those years with Grendel, and with each new story arc and each new artist who came along, that we, even you guys, people loved you, but it was the extreme, they either loved you or they hated you, and then by the time we got to the end of your run, they loved you so hard that when Bernie came on, and was such a radical change in style, again, the responses were really extreme, and for as long as we were getting that kind of impassioned response, I didn't care whether it was positive or negative. If people were feeling something, and that's what was important,
But all of that and this collaborative spirit and this independent spirit it all generates from this group, and it's very much a family. And when they took jobs at Dark Horse, so they're going to Oregon. Matt decides to move to Oregon.
They would be me and my former husband, Bob Schreck, who's in our audience today.
Bobby Schreck right there, one of my heroes.
And then we started breeding in Oregon.
So they're all coming to Oregon, and then
We just took him to the nightclub.
But you become a part of this family, and so we we barely had anything published yet, and they're inviting us up and to their dinner parties and whatnot. Shrek pretty much introduced us to our very first comic book convention and showed us how that worked, and what to do and what not to do, and how to be gracious and classy and have dignity, and recognizing artistic merit when you see it. All of that came from these people. That was the start of my career, is in this room, and endless gratitude. Every joyful
I'm
thing.
you say you took it and ran, my friend.
That's
We're also very grateful. Thank you.
Well, thanks for
Because
contributing.
it did become a phenomenon in a way that we certainly could expect. And it took us on a path that we weren't even fully planning, but we were again, very green, and the world was brand new. We were kind of out on our own, just for the first time. So that changed our lives. I mean, drawing Grendel changed our lives, and it changed our path. It created a path, and like Mike says, and it, one of the great things, and to both Diana's point as well, that this book, this story world, became an incubator for a lot of creative people to find their voice, and us included. I mean, we were sort of lucky to cross paths, in that way, as fate would have it. It sort of, taught us a lot of lessons. We were almost too young to really know what to even do with it, I think, other than to just keep going. We didn't have the real foresight to go, oh, let's do a franchise character, or let's do, okay, this is industry. We were like, oh, how can we bend this medium further? How can we are now being
but that's the
published.
good result.
That was the right. So we were just in that raw creative space because we had success and from folks liking the work, and we thought, well, where else can we take it, and how far can we take it? But I think that permission to do that through a character like Grendel, where we could sort of push the boundaries of ourselves creatively and of hopefully the medium, and inspire others hopefully, and Diana, of course, kept us on a bit of a leash, luckily, which in hindsight I'm like, good.
It was a monthly book.
We were a little wild.
I know, but those lessons are some of the best you get.
They are, and it's transformative, and we wouldn't be sitting here, certainly, obviously.
Hey, so this is our generation. Let's kind of bring in the next generation here. And
I wanted
you grew up with Grendel, so what do you got to say about it?
Exactly, that's.
If you can't marry your colorist, make one.
Yeah. Bred my own. And I'm chained up in a shack out back. We throw him a chicken every once in a while.
Yeah, so I've been growing up reading Grendel virtually my whole life. I mean, I've always had access to it, so that was the major thing. I mean, just having it around. I think I was reading it before I was even allowed to, technically.
Yeah, well, we never had that allowed to. I've never had that.
Yeah, no.
Let your kids read whatever the fuck they want.
Yeah.
If they're shocked or offended, they'll stop reading it. They will censor themselves.
And this stuff was a little too adult for me when I was really little and into anime and Dragon Ball Z and that kind of garbage. But once I got to a certain age, I was able to really appreciate this stuff. And I remember we had built a big shelf. He needed to store all of these singles that he had. So many singles. The comps, they would flow back in the day. They're stingier now, but so many comps back in the 90s. And so we had to build a big shelf in our crawl space for them. And I remember the deal that I made with him was I want one copy of everything that you've ever done to do this. So at that point, I read Grendel in its entirety, and it made a huge impact on me, especially like they keep saying, the way that Grendel changes. If anyone in this room hasn't read Grendel, I strongly recommend that you do so, because it'll just show you what comic books are capable of, and how ahead of the time some of these stories were back in the 80s. So hugely influential for me, and I knew right away when I was younger and reading this stuff that I wanted to do this professionally one day. I always pictured drawing it and writing it. I don't think anybody really says, I'm gonna color them. I think most of us when we're younger say, I'm gonna make them just in their entirety.
I remember comics pages that you drew when you were like 7 or 8, Bren.
Yep, and I do still draw and paint a lot. I'm actually getting painted cover gigs. So I'm taking on more of that work. I just did painted work for the Z2 Blondie comic graphic novel that came out. So I'm getting opportunities to draw more and more. I don't think it's out.
He says it's not out.
We have a Z2 member in the audience. He says no.
No? Okay. No, that's right. It's not out, but it's coming out.
I plan on that too.
We do, and I'm going to ask if could the raffle ticket bowl be brought up here so that Matt may draw one? We have 2 prizes. First, we will give away this signed copy of the omnibus. Thank you very much. All right.
Yes, I still have mine.
All right. The number is 837574. 574.
Do you want it personalized?
No, not me. I was showing off the Pander Brothers.
Oh.
Oh.
Ah.
Who's got the ticket, baby?
Who's the winner? Let's read it one more
What is it
time.
again?
Let's read it one more time.
837574.
If you don't call it, we gotta draw the next one.
I'm gonna mix them up some more. All right, we'll do another. So we do have another exciting prize after this, which I will reveal in a moment.
A brand new car.
I wish.
Grendel painted on the front.
If I had that, I would keep it. 837599. Hey!
Ta-da!
So, same question. Do you want it personalized or just signed by?
To Jason.
Jason.
And so as we take care of that, I'm going to show off the next prize. They're both very cool.
Has an original page from Batman Grendel here.
Yes.
Yeah. Even I don't see many of these days.
Again, when I was talking about how the original goal might be for somebody, the be-all end-all, to work for Marvel and DC, but when you have success with your own creations, and then they do come calling, same thing, same rules applies. You get to do what you want to do, and there's a perfect example of that right there.
Yeah, you've had some pretty big crossovers.
Yeah. Yep. This was well, and after Batman Grendel, I got approached by just a bunch of people to do. Thanks, Jason. Yeah. To do a bunch of, my attitude was kind of like, well, after Batman, where do you go? I mean, I just wasn't too interested. So
You do Batman again. Was that the first from the first Batman?
from the first one, yeah. So these are my original designs for the statue. Who's the sculptor?
GW. Let me go back. Steve Kiwus is.
Steve Hughes, yeah. He just did a beautiful job.
Very cool.
It looks really great. If you go on the Dark Horse Direct site, they have a really beautiful video turnaround of it that it just shows you it from every angle, and it's just really, really lovely.
We'll share that again on our social media as well. It's a nice 360 turnaround, so you
Yeah.
can see all angles. And yeah, these are some of the sketches I thought were cool to show.
And the approach I want to take with this, again, since this is Grendel's 40th anniversary, we've had some Grendel statues before. The first one was by my dear buddy Randy Bowen for Bowen Designs. And in fact, it was the first statue Bowen Designs ever did. And that had a much more romantic approach. If anybody remembers what it looked like, Grendel's holding a skull, kind of like Hamlet, and he's swathed in a thicket of roses and skulls, So for this one, in 40 years, I wanted him to dominate. And so one of the earliest pulp characters is a French character named Fantomas, who was a gentleman thief and a rogue. And one of the most famous covers from those days is a Fantomas looming over and, in fact, stepping on in his tux and his domino mask, stepping on the city of Paris. So I wanted to kind of emulate that here with Grendel looming over the city. And then, of course, we have that the rose insignia for Hunter Rose.
And Hunter Rose is the story of Focus in the upcoming Netflix series.
Abu Bakr Ali plays Hunter Rose, Grendel. First Arab American Muslim cast in a lead role for a comic book movie, a comic book show. Really happy with how it's all going. I can't say a whole lot about it because Netflix pretty tight-lipped about all that shit.
I saw the first episode and it's awesome.
Yeah. He can say that.
They've shared some behind the scenes tidbits. I mean, Abu Bakr himself has shared a bit, and I agree, it looks really cool.
So my very first Grendel issues, the very first ones that you signed, are going to be worth a lot of money.
Well, I hope so.
I-
Hold on to it, folks.
Get mine signed.
And now we have the cool reveal that we promised for you all. Matt, I'm going to let you take it away.
So this is my newest project. Following Devil's Odyssey, the Grendel Prime in Outer Space storyline, we had announced that I was going to be doing a new thing called Devil's Crucible. And in fact, it was an overarching story arc that was going to be broken into 3 movements, 3 4-issue series. So Devil's Crucible Defiance, Devil's Crucible Sedition, Devil's Crucible Necrotic. And once the news broke about the TV show, I went to Dark Horse and I said, you know, you guys, I should really be working on a Hunter Rose story, not a Grendel Prime story. I can go back and finish this. And I was pretty far into it. I was in the middle of the 3rd issue of Devil's Crucible, the first 4-issue arc. And so nearly done with it. And so we decided to do a Hunter Rose thing, but what? And you know, Devil by the Deed is kind of the overarching Grendel story arc that was later very much fleshed out in the many Black, White, and Red stories. But when you go back and look at Devil by the Deed, it was serialized in the back of Mage. Considering the importance it had on the Grendel mythos and the legacy it spawned, it's only 36 pages long. And I drew it when I was 24. So I've completely redone Devil by the Deed to 120 pages. And it is all brand new art.
And it is beautiful.
It's all brand new art. And when I did the original one, we had not yet at that point settled on Black, White, and Red being Hunter's palette. But now we do. And so it's colored by Brennan in Black, White, and Red. And as you can see there, it just looks like it's almost a full color palette, you know.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot to render this like as if I were doing it fully colored. So I'm using as many like tricks and techniques and sort of rendering approaches, anything from like watercolory to hard cut rendering, shading.
It's told in the same fashion as if you are reading Christine Sparr's book about Hunter Rose, which is called Devil by the Deed. So it's told in sections of text as if you're reading her book. There's no word balloons, there's no captions. But again, as you can see, it's all completely new art. The text is greatly expanded. There's scenes that I incorporate from some bits from Black, White, and Red, some bits from Behold the Devil, the storyline I did for the 25th anniversary. Some bits you've never seen, and some bits that are familiar. But it's a brand new, completely. It's as if you know the Beatles re-recorded one of their albums at age 60 as opposed to age 24. That might not be a good thing, but this time it is.
And so I know a lot of people were wanting something special like this as we celebrate the Grendel 40th anniversary. We couldn't tell you about it quite yet. We've been saving this. A full announcement will come soon. We'll give you all the details as soon as we can. I can tell you now that it will be arriving in summer 2023. So we'll do a big announcement, let you know when pre-orders are there.
That first photo she showed there was me laying down my pen on the stack of finished pages.
Yes.
So I'm all done. Brandon's got, how many more you got? 4 or 6 pages, something like that to finish coloring?
I am in the last 4 pages of coloring.
So,
All right. Well, I know we are starting to come up on time, so you want to draw the second one in?
sure.
All right.
And I just gotta say, I've been looking at this guy's art my entire life growing up, and this book is the cream of the crop. This is some of the best stuff I've ever seen him draw, and it's for 120 pages straight. It's just gorgeous, seriously.
He's already getting our fucking money.
I'm very happy that you are all here today so we can share this with you. There is more awesome Grendel stuff coming. The omnibuses are really nice too. They are a larger trim size. They do bring those original comics to full comic trim size for the first time. So,
And before you read that though, hang on.
Yes.
More Grendel stuff. So then, now I'm done with this. Now I'm finishing up Devil's Crucible. So Devil's Crucible will follow title details of this. Let me just say, it, as we always try and do, it turns everything in the Grendel world up when it's here. So totally unexpected. Gonna be some massively cool shit in it, and it looks nothing like this. So,
And I'm coloring that one too.
yes.
And,
Oh yeah. And go ahead.
and with that one, I'm doing painted covers. So finally getting my chance at.
There's 3 4-issue
Doing
series.
full
He's
page
doing
work.
a variant for the first of each of the 3 series.
nice.
And if you want to come up to me after this, I have the first one done on my phone. And I'll show it to you.
Yeah,
I love it.
I love it.
Diana. All right. Without further ado, the winner of the statue is 837610. Hey! Actually, we don't have it yet. It will be out later this year. See me after this, and I'll get your shipping info.
And would you like me to personalize it for you? Because I live right near the offices, so I can do that. What's your name? Oh, she's gonna get it. Yep.
Yep.
Thanks,
Well,
man. Congrats.
We will connect. So congratulations. We have just a few minutes left. These are the omnibus editions, the first two, which contain the work of all of our esteemed guests here. We have both the Pander Brothers and Mike Allred collected in these. Of course, Christine Spar features heavily in the second one. And we have time for maybe a couple of questions. If anybody would like to come up and do one burning Grendel question. Otherwise, oh yeah,
Go ahead,
please.
Jason. Yeah.
Yeah, when you were talking about how one of the things that drew you all to Dark Horse was the freedom of expression and the ability to do whatever you wanted. How did the Batman Grendel, how did something like that work, where you have more of a corporate structure in place that you would need to play by their rules or whatever? Like,
Well, that came up with the previous publisher first. You remember more?
Yeah, in both cases, we handled production, but everything had to be approved by DC, and my counterpart at DC was the late Denny O'Neil, and he can, you know, he had his particularities about Batman, but by and large, in the end, he was really pretty easy to work with, and I don't recall having any, you know, major
No, but I had some
fights.
internal problems, and here's a cool story about that. So, you know, I get this opportunity. Oh, do you want to take your character that you came up with and match it up with Batman? You know, and you know, it was a bit numbing. It was paralyzing to some degree. Now, this situation came about shortly after my run with the Panders on Devil's Legacy. So, you know, Christine Spar was the hot Grendel at that point. So my first impulse was to do a female Grendel. And so I had this super fucking convoluted storyline where Grendel was a fictional persona in Batman's world, and this woman becomes obsessed with Grendel and eventually becomes Grendel. And it was just torturous. It was just the absolutely wrong way to go. I had written up a proposal, and Denny didn't like it. And Diana called me and said, "What is this shit?" He goes, "Hunter Rose, Bruce Wayne, just do them." And sometimes stuff is just staring you right in the face. You don't recognize it until somebody slaps you on the back of the head. So that's how that worked out.
They're kind of two sides of the same
Yeah, and
coin.
that's what led me to that
yeah.
first scene where they're in the Gotham Men's Club, and it's like they're just like the same guy except doing different shit, you know.
All right. Well, do we have one final question? I think we're pretty much at time. Thank you all again for joining us. Thank you to our star-studded cast here.
And thanks very much to Kara for her hard work in putting this together.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Kara. And I just want to say, Pop and I don't have a table, but I have some prints on me in a portfolio. If anyone wants to come up to me and inquire about like Mage and Grendel prints, I have a bunch of them on me. So.
Little hall retail.
Yep. There you go.
We're table or booth 802.